What is up, everybody? So lately, there's been a lot of chatter about everyone's favorite cat, Valkyr. She has a rework coming up that they talked about at the recent dev stream at PAX East, and there's a dev workshop out on her rework. Now, the big hullabaloo is removing invulnerability on her 4. So it is basically going to be forcing Valkyr to go from being a invulnerability frame to being a health tank frame. Because just being straight up, Valkyr is not a good shield gate frame. It just how she plays just doesn't really work. Like you're probably gonna end up replacing her 3 for pillage or something, and so I'm just want to go back to this video I recorded 3 years ago about Valkyr. So let's see what I had to say back then.
Um, so it's basically a shield gating build for Valkyr. As you know, one of the big issues with any tank that's trying to soak damage through their health, it's always a problem because eventually enemies will just do so much damage that you will get one shot.
Yep.
Whereas a shield-based build is just not susceptible to that because shields are effectively infinite mitigation as long as you can keep generating shields.
All right, that's basically it. Here's the problem. Health tanking. You cannot compete with the other types of survivability options in Warframe with health tanking. And there's one very simple reason. So let's talk about some of the options here. We have straight up invulnerability, so that's just like Hysteria in its current form, Nyx's 4, Mesmer Skin, Corvex when he's using his augment, stuff like that. You have Overguard, which yes, Overguard doesn't have damage mitigation, but every Overguard frame either has a way to scale it to ridiculous levels that scales with enemy damage, like Rhino and Neja. And even if they don't, there's an overguard gate. So when overguard goes down, it's just like shield gating. So you're still having a period to get your overguard back up. On top of that, most overguard frames like Dante, Frost, even like Ember with her new augment, like the things that generate overguard for you are things you're like spamming in your playstyle anyways. So like Dante is constantly using his Overguard ability. Frost is constantly using his 4. Styanax is constantly using his 4. You're just because there's that gate there, and like Kullervo as well. Like you're never really gonna die with those frames just by playing them normally. And because there is that concept of a gate, which brings us to shields, which also have a gate, like they, as long as you have 1 point of overguard or 1 point of shield, you cannot die because of that gate effect, right? Now, there's another niche case, which is invisibility, which I play solo almost all the time. I just think the game is more fun that way. And when you're solo and you're invisible, enemies just don't even attack you. So it's like pseudo invulnerability. The worst thing you have to worry about is like maybe getting hit by a stray ground effect or something. But even then, because you're invisible and enemies aren't hitting you, your shields are always going to be up, and you maybe have to slot in rolling guard. That's like it. And that's like on frames like Ash, Avara, whatever. So, of those options we just discussed, straight up invulnerability, shield gating, overguard gating, invisibility, none of those interact with the amount of damage enemies are doing, because as far as those systems are concerned, an enemy could do 1 point of damage to break your shields or a billion points of damage to break your shields. It doesn't matter. As long as you have any shields or overguard or you're invulnerable, you won't die. Now that brings us to health tanking, which is a completely different story. Because health tanking, instead of being that binary state of I had Overguard, I had Mesmer Skin charges, I had any shield up, and you either do or you don't, and if you do, you doesn't matter how much damage the enemy does, so it's very binary. For health tanking, it's much more continuous. So you have to factor in, well, okay, like how much damage is the enemy going to do with an attack? How much of that damage am I mitigating through armor? How much of that damage am I then mitigating through damage reduction effects, such as like Eclipse is a damage reduction effect you can get through helmets now. So there's like, but one of the things that they did, because people were abusing damage reduction effects, because some of them would add together multiplicatively, some would it would be additive. They made it so that every single form of damage reduction was put together multiplicatively. So it was impossible to ever get to 100% damage reduction, which is, that's presumably good for the game because people were doing things like running flying damage reduction mods on Titania, becoming literally immune to damage, which is like, whatever. So there's a lot more to factor in for a health gating build than a shield gating build. And the point at which it becomes ineffective happens way sooner than with those other builds. Because frankly, those other builds, because they effectively have infinite mitigation, it's not a can I tank this amount of damage? It's do I have the resources to generate that defensive system, whether it's Mesmer Skin, Overguard, whatever. And here's the other problem is that the methods, like generally that resource is going to be energy, right? So every build, every end game build in Warframe, a huge part of it is you always want to make sure you have energy economy. So you want to make sure you have enough energy coming in to do the things you want to do with your build. So that's just a thing you do normally. This sounds similar. So like Frost is gonna want to cast his 4 all the time anyways. He's gonna want to have the energy to cast his 4 anyways. So the mods that you're gonna use on that type of frame are going to benefit the build you want to have on that frame anyways. Whereas with health tanking, you need to take way more mods. You need to have health mods, armor mods, adaptation, potentially health conversion, or any number of other defensive mods, potentially defensive arcanes, all to have a finite amount of damage absorption, whereas all these other approaches have an infinite amount of damage absorption, and the mods you use for those builds just align with what those builds want to do anyways. So this is why health tanking sucks. And and I want to make it extremely clear. So let me just hop into Warframe really quick. I'm on Valkyr.
What?
Okay,
Were
so
you
let me just go to
expecting
my
dinner?
profile. So I have like
Better.
6,000 hours in Warframe, right? And if we go to my equipment, my most played for my frames, my most played is mag. I try to play a pretty broad variety of frames, so like my most played is at 4.5 because I try to play a lot of different things. But Valkyr is number 3, and this isn't including her normal version, so it's potentially she's closer to Ember. But um, I really like Valkyr. I've tried her a lot, and if we go back to this video I made, so my idea back then was, can you have a Valkyr build where you can use Warcry and not use Hysteria, so you can use other melee weapons? And so in this build, I was using like the Prolonged Paralysis augment. So it was more focused on not using Hysteria, but that meant you had to find some way to survive. And what I discovered, even all those years ago, and it's still going to be relevant today, is it doesn't matter how much armor you put on something. It doesn't matter how good you try to make that thing at health tanking. It is never going to be as good as shield gating or now overguard gating or straight up invulnerability. Now, the thing that really blows my mind is we've had 2 changes recently that added more invulnerability effects into the game. One of which is Corvex's 4 augment, which lets him shoot a giant Kamehameha radiation laser beam out of his chest and be completely immortal all the time. You know what that lets you do? That lets you completely disregard defensive mods in your mod loadout. You don't have to worry about it because you're immune. Same thing with Nyx. Nyx just got reworked with 1999, and one of the best parts about Nyx is you can literally put any mods you want on Nyx. You can build her with whatever mods you want because you don't have to worry about survivability because of her 4. The only thing you need is one augment mod. And then she takes care of practically every defensive or every enemy defensive in the game with just 130% strength, which you can get with 2 Archon shards. So that leaves you all the rest of your mod slots and all the rest of your Archon shard slots to do whatever you want. You could make a melee focused frame, put violet shards on there, you could make whatever, it doesn't matter. So, and in the past, you could do that in the past with her, but it was a lot harder because of how her 4 worked. With the update, it's way easier to use her 4 for immortality. And then you have stuff like, the classics, like Mesmer, like Revenant with Mesmer skin. On top of that, there's some frames that have pseudo invulnerability, like Gara has a ton of damage reduction, but she also straight up goes immune when she's casting her 4. So like it's if you're like actively playing the game with her, you're never gonna die because that's kind of just how she works. So it really just it brings us to a dichotomy of like there are frames that can and there are frames that can't. And when I mean can or can't, I've said this before in other videos. The issue in Warframe is not doing damage. We have so many mods, abilities have gotten buffed so much, status effects have gotten buffed, there's all these like, weapon specific augment mods, there's all these new arcanes, like doing damage in Warframe is not hard. It's very easy to do the damage you need to do to kill enemies. The way harder part about Warframe is doing that and surviving. So that's why you have a frame like Ember, who has, yeah, sure, she's not the best frame ever. Her 4 is not super great, but she has 90% damage reduction and overguard. So she's never, ever, ever dying, which makes her like a fun frame to play. Because it turns out when you can't die and you can actually play the game, it's a lot more fun. Now, then you have a frame like Equinox, which Equinox's biggest problem. Now, this is also, I prefer to play solo, not in a group. If you're in a group and you happen to get a Dante who's spamming Overguard on you all the time, yeah, congratulations, you don't need to worry about survivability then. But when you're playing solo, it is a way different story. And I want to make one really big point. I am not talking about level cap. I'm like there's been this like weird thing in this Valkyr discussion where like the people who don't like that her 4 invulnerability is getting removed all do like level cap with Valkyr. Spoiler alert, no one is out there doing level cap runs with Valkyr. That's not what's happening. The problem when you try to health tank with even a frame like Valkyr, which is supposedly tanky, you die in like normal steel path. This isn't an endurance run problem. This is just like an issue at almost all stages of the game where you can die in normal steel path missions. You can definitely die in EDA or ETA. I would never take a health tank frame into EDA or ETA. I took Nidus into ETA one time and it was awful. I like barely had enough mutation stacks to make it through because you just take so much damage that you're just constantly consuming your mutation. So yeah, so this is not a level cap or endurance run problem. This is always an issue. So if you take a frame like Equinox, even if you slot in a defensive helmet, she still just takes a truckload of damage. So yes, Maim is really powerful, but like it's kind of hard to pilot her even with a good build. Then you have a frame like Protea, who has an extended shield gate, or Hildren, very easy to survive. So, like frames that have some type of if you have the combination of like they are innately good at shield gating, which either means they have some kind of synergy with shields in their kit already. So like Mag generates a ton of shields, Protea, Hildren, etc. They kind of synergize with shields anyways. And if you have some kind of CC on top of that, like, Mag has a ton of CC, Nova has a ton of CC, and then there's also damage reduction, which is like, Nova's molecular, not molecular prime, her null stars. So like, if you have some combination of those, you're gonna do pretty well. It's gonna be relatively easy to survive. Now there are some other frames that don't have good CC. They aren't super well suited to shield gating. Like maybe they can generate shields, but it's not. They don't have natural synergies. They just have to use like brief respite, and they don't have any damage mitigation. Those frames are pretty rough, and I'm looking at it right here. Like I love Banshee so much, but trying to survive in missions with Banshee is really hard. It just is not fun. And then you get to like the worst case scenario, which is you don't have any shield synergy at all. You can't generate Overguard, and you are a health tank frame. Now, what are the health tank frames? Inaros, Lavos, Nidus, Grendel. I can't think of any else off the top of my head. Those are the big ones. Um, those frames, like, you can make them function, but let's go look at like my Lavos build. Um, like, I haven't really played them that much since the Prime came out, so I don't even know what this build. Yeah, it's like a ton of defensive mods. So literally half of my mods on this frame are defensive mods. 3 Umbrals and adaptation, and a defensive arcane. So like, let's contrast that with a frame like, I don't know, Frost, which I actually have no idea what build I have on Frost, to be completely honest. Oh wow, look, I have literally 0 defensive mods on here. I mean, I have I don't even know why I have Umbral Fiber. I'm pretty sure that this, oh no, yeah, this is actually on purpose, because I wanted to I actually have no idea why that's on there. Anyways, I think it's just because I have an Umbral polarity, but maybe bigger snow globes, or maybe this scales. Oh, it's armor to overguard conversion, that's why. And I had an Umbral slot on here, but I wanted to use precision intensify, so whatever. Regardless, you're gonna be spamming, you know, Frost is kind of a weird case because his overguard scales with armor, but regardless, like, you are generally, or I guess let's just look at Valkyr, like a Hysteria build. So this is a, let's see here, I don't know. I have Umbral Forma on her, so I usually have Umbral mods on here. But anyways, if you have a pure health tank frame, like let's go to Inaros, like you have to allocate a ton of your mod slots. Probably like half of your mod slots and at least 1 arcane are going to go to defensive mods. Whereas with like a shield gate build, way less stringent. Like you might have adaptation or maybe rolling guard. That's like it. So, and then of course we have like Nyx, who, Nyx, yeah, I mean, I have rolling guard. The only reason I have rolling guard on here is for like boss enemies that deactivate your abilities. And that's just because like there was no other mods that I really cared about putting there. So, that's kind of like is what it is. So the difference is with like a shield, the health tank or a health gate frame, or not even health gate, health tanking frame, you're going to be spending like half your mods on defensive mods, whereas on other frames that have invulnerability or like natural shield gating synergies or natural overguard synergies, you have to spend like 1 to 2 mods on that. So it makes building them a lot harder. Now, what does this all mean? Like, people are mad about Valkyr's 4 change, but what what is the actual, like, why of that? And what I really, really hope that DE understands is that it's much less of a invulnerability problem and more of a health tanking is just flat out not viable at all problem. So they really need to take, if they're going to go forward with this Valkyr rework, then they really, really, really need to take a look at how health gating or how health tanking works. One way they could do that, and I think that this would be a pretty cool idea, is having something like health gating, where maybe in addition to or instead of, probably in addition to reducing the damage you receive by a percentage, the amount of armor you have could also introduce some kind of health gating mechanic, right? So, like, if you have 5,000 armor, you can only take 50 points of damage at a time. Whereas if you're a frame that is a shield gating frame and you have like 100 armor, well, then you can take up to like 10,000 damage at one time or something. These are just fake numbers, obviously. But like, I feel like there's an opportunity there to introduce some mechanic because, like, frankly, like, I agree with DE. I think invulnerability is really bad for the game. I think, you know, uh, Revenant's been a problem for a long time. Frames like Nyx have been a problem for a long time. I'm gonna be honest, like, here, I don't know if I have. So, okay, this is like for Nyx. Do you know what I do? If I have to fight a boss, let's say I have to fight a Lich, I just put this build on, I turn on my 4, or sorry, like a Coda fight. I just ignore every single mechanic. Because why wouldn't I do that? It'd be like why? Like, they're not like really that crazy of mechanics, and the hitboxes are terrible, but whatever, that's a different so like, why wouldn't I just sit there completely immune and not have to worry about the mechanics at all? Same thing with like taking Revenant to an Archon hunt or something like that. So, I there's a reason why people use frames that basically can't die, like Wukong or Revenant or, whatever. Insert your pseudo invulnerable frame, of choice. Um, there's a reason why people use those frames, and it's because health tanking sucks. It feels bad. You have to waste a ton of mods. It just doesn't work very well. And it's just, why would you do it when there's such better alternatives? So that's one of the reasons why um, the Valkyr
And
rework has
who
not
needs to
been
meet them?
going too well. Now, I want to address the rework itself a little bit. So, if we look at Valkyr's current abilities, I don't know if I have one that does not have. I don't think so. No, I don't have a loadout that doesn't have a helmet, but we'll just pretend this is Ripline, right? Okay, so what are they changing? Um, let's go look at the dev workshop really quick. Okay. All right. So new passive, right? So she gets basically more melee damage. Now, I would be shocked if this was multiplicative melee damage. I am like I'm assuming that this is additive melee damage. Now, what is that competing with? Condition overload. Like, everybody's running around with companions that are putting like 45 status effects on enemies. So, like, 300% additional melee damage that's adding into what condition overload is already giving you is like not really that good. Now, if it says kills grant a small amount of rage, um, I don't know if assists build the same amount of rage. That is going to be very important. Finisher kills and mercy kills granting more rage. That's, okay. Now you do get rage from kind of any melee type activity, which is good, I guess. But you do need to get up to 75% rage to get that invulnerability window. So the real question here is, how easy is it to get to 75% rage? If you have to kill like 30 enemies, this is going to be terrible. If you have to kill like 3 enemies, okay, well maybe that's a lot better. I'm gonna tell you straight up, this literally does not matter at all. It just doesn't. It's a placebo. It's like nice to see the number go up. The biggest benefit to this is probably Arcane Battery becoming a little better, but otherwise it doesn't really change anything. The Ripline effect, I think this is really cool. I'm interested to see how this works. I presumably, you could have just put another grouping ability on your Helminth or from Helminth in your one slot, but I'm one of the weird people who actually likes rip lines, so I'm not going to complain about this getting some more, usability. I think it's really cool. This is probably my favorite part of the rework, honestly. Warcry, just nice quality of life effects. Now, this is where we get to like the rework being a little fake. So, paralysis has this melee damage vulnerability, and like a slow, but it also costs a ton of energy. Um, yeah, okay, so as of right now, one of the nice things about paralysis is that it costs basically no energy. That's really nice because hysteria costs a lot of energy. even with even with a ton of efficiency, hysteria still costs quite a bit of energy to maintain. So having paralysis basically cost like no energy was really awesome. Um, And why do I say like fake rework? Because they have this melee vulnerability stat on there. But if you hit someone with paralysis, it opened them up to a finisher. And Hysteria had a 24 times multiplier on enemies that were opened up by paralysis. So like that synergy was like kind of already there. So that's why I'm saying it's like a little fake. Now, of course, like more damage is nice, but like Valkyr, especially once they added arcanes and they let you put like, you know, all mods on Hysteria, like Valkyr does not struggle with dealing damage. Like I'm just gonna say straight up, like it she does a truckload of damage. Especially Tennokai is so good on Valkyr. It's just like hitting those massive heavy attacks from Tennokai is just amazing. Now, would I mind them updating the animations of her attacks in her 4 to be a little less awkward? I'm so for that. I hope that that's part of this. Now we get to her 4, which this as I've mentioned, I don't think this is a bad change. I think this is a bad change if they don't change how health tanking works. Now, keeping your status immunity, that's really nice. Reduced your energy costs, which that's really nice. This is also really rough. Before, this was a percentage of your damage in Hysteria. So it had 5% lifesteal, which was way better than 50. It was basically a full heal every time you hit. Now this is obviously not going to be a full heal. So I that's obviously a huge nerf. There's no way around it. Now adding slash effects to her combos, that's great. I mean, it's awesome. Here's the problem. The enemies that are really hard to kill either are immune to status effects or you can only stack up to 4. So it's really nice that there are slash effects on her claws. But any normal enemy that you could apply slash effects to, she's probably like killing in 1 or 2 hits anyways. So this is a nice change. It's definitely, it's going to help, but it doesn't really change the status quo that much. So, more damage multipliers. The increased range is nice. Like, this is actually kind of a nerf because you can't use Shattering Impact anymore, but it's kind of whatever. Buff to the augment. So here's the thing, okay? Warcry is the same. Ripline got some nice changes, but really the only thing that's different is the group up effect. Her 3 is like kind of the same, if maybe a little worse, and her 4 is way worse. So I don't really know like what they were going for with this rework. Like I think it's like, Valkyr is like a berserker type thing. Hoorah rah, give her a ton of or give her a ton of armor, and like she gets better when she kills enemies. Like thematically, I can kind of see what they were going for. It's just the implementation. It's just, I mean, we'll see how it lands when it releases, but they really, really, really need to address how bad health tanking is if they're going to make this type of a change. And also, like, why does Valkyr lose her invulnerability when you just added a new invulnerability with Corvex's augment and you rework Nyx so her invulnerability is way better on top of all the other frames that are practically invulnerable. Even just with the pseudo exalted weapon rework, Excalibur is immune when he's slash dancing or slash dashing. You could literally just play Excalibur mashing one, do really good damage with melee influence, and be completely immune to damage. Same thing with Atlas. Atlas is invulnerable during landslide. So you can just spam landslide, kill everything, because now that, the exalted weapon frames can use arcanes, it's absolutely ridiculous the amount of damage they do. So once again, you're invulnerable while that's going on. So why does Valkyr lose her invulnerability? And why and people are saying it'll make her like more interesting to play. Let's be straight up. If you play Valkyr right now, there is nothing in this rework that changes how Valkyr is going to play. The only thing it's going to change is you're going to be incentivized to rip line to enemies. But like I said, you could take Valkyr's iteration on live right now, put in snare over her one, and it would play basically the exact same as this rework. So what's going to happen? People who don't like Valkyr might try her out for a week, a day, buy her heirloom skin, and then move on and never touch her again. And then the people who do actually like playing Valkyr are stuck with, in my opinion, a heavily nerfed version of Valkyr. So do I want them to just add the 4 invulnerability back in? Frankly, no. I do actually think just invulnerability is really bad for the game. If I wish that they would take a huge pass through the game and rework all of the defensive systems. I don't think there should be any invulnerability anymore. I think you should have varying levels of mitigation, but nothing should be like true invulnerability. Now, for that to actually happen, that would be a massive overhaul of how the game works. And is that going to happen? Yeah, probably not. If I'm going to be honest, that there's just no chance that that's going to happen. I hope a middle of the road response would be them at least taking a look at how health tanking works. I don't really want them to add her invulnerability back in. I do think that this design is more interesting. I just think it's going to be way less powerful. And Valkyr's one niche right now is that she is basically can't die because of hysteria, and she's like a melee focused frame. So now after the rework, she's going to be a melee focused frame that can die. So why wouldn't I just play Nyx or something with Warcry? And it also doesn't help that her Warcry is her Helminth, which is probably the one ability that buffs melee that everybody would want. So like I could just take a Nyx and put Warcry on it, or Revenant, put Warcry on him, and it's like an infinitely better version of Valkyr. Now, I really like Valkyr's aesthetic. I like her like sound effects. Like Megan absolutely crushed it with the sound effects on her. I just like the theme of the frame, so I'm probably gonna play her anyways. But I really hope DE understands where the community's feedback is coming from. We don't want to just be immune all the time, but on some frames that's kind of the only choice because health tanking is so bad. So I'd love to hear people's thoughts on this. Hear what people think. I really hope the devs don't just and DE is usually really good about this. They're great. They're the best in the business at listening to their community. I hope they don't hear so much of the we want her to be invulnerable all the time, and I hope they understand that it's coming from a place of we just wish health tanking wasn't ass. So on the topic of ass, her heirloom skin's coming out and it looks great. So I'd love to hear your comments. Thanks very much for listening. I haven't posted in like forever because frankly I haven't really been playing a massive amount of Warframe. The 1999 update was amazing. I thought it was really, 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 really good. But you know, I've farmed everything, and I've kind of just mostly been playing single player games this year. You know, got Doom coming out in a couple days, so probably gonna be playing that. I do hop in and play Warframe pretty often still. You know, just farmed all the lich stuff and whatever, but haven't felt inspired enough to make any build videos. So, and frankly, a lot of what's killed my desire to make build videos is the fact that every fucking build is a goddamn shield gating build, because that's the only way to live. So that honestly took a lot of the enjoyment of making builds out of the game for me. So you know, here's hoping that DE can make some changes. So thanks for watching, everybody. Appreciate your time. Would love to hear your thoughts on the matter. So thanks. See you around.